Hello, this is John Burbeck, your host on the Poets Corner, and today I'm very honored to have the first poet laureate of Iowa as my guest, Marvin Bell. Marvin is, now he's a modest fellow, and I know he don't want me to recite a bunch of kudos here, but credit must go where credit is due. Marvin is a longtime professor at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he's the Lamont professor. Well, let me read this. I didn't have it all memorized. Yeah. Okay, it's a Lamont Award from the Academy of Poets. That was an award. The Guggenheim and National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships, senior Fulbright appointments to Yugoslavia and Australia, and author of 17, at last count I got 17 books, and of poetry and essays. And of course published in journals and magazines beyond count worldwide. Marvin is the godfather of sorts of a legion of poets that have gone on in their own right and become very famous, among whom is Jory Graham, Jim Tate, Norman Dubie. Let me read from this short list here. I did make a list of all of them, because some of you out in the audience might know some of these people, have gone to school with them maybe. And Marv was their teacher, and so I like to think of Marvin as the godfather of Iowa poetry. He has mentored people like Jory Graham, Norman Dubie, John Irving, Rita Dove, James Tate, David St. John, Mercury McPeak, Villatoro.
Marcos.
Oh yeah.
Marcos McPeak,
Villatoro. Joy Harjo, Patricia Hempel, Mary Swander, Lee Blessing, Marilyn Chin, to name a very few. So we're in the presence of a man who has more or less engendered a whole new generation of heavies in the American literary scene. Okay, Marvin, did you happen to take in Breathing Between the Lines?
We got back to town. We'd been away. We've been going away between semesters, and now I'm on so-called phased retirement and only teaching the first semester. We've extended our stay in the East, on Eastern Long Island. But we got back Thursday in time to go to opening night, and I had a heck of a time, so we went back the next two nights, too.
Oh, I went Friday night, and I just haven't been right since. Our own Mark Mccusker was one of the you know Mark?
Yeah.
He's one of the choreographers, and our own, oh God, here I go, my mind is slipping again with names. Deanne Mortman. And those two were just hysterical.
It was a terrific show.
I loved it, and I've never really been able to sit through a dance or a play, and this just flew right by.
Yeah. Well, Friday night, the second night, a former student of mine, a poet named Charlie Langton, who lives in Decorah, came up to me at intermission and gave me this Tibetan prayer necklace that I'm wearing. He had gotten it in Dar es Salaam, actually.
Oh.
He's a wonderful poet and a terrific guy. He sponsors a Tibetan refugee child, and he handed me this at the break.
Oh, that's a nice, that's kind of a nice little touch, you know, to be given a little souvenir, you know, right in the middle of a... Do you remember one time, I think you were in the audience, there was a poet named Mary Stroh.
Oh, yeah.
And you were at her reading, and I think this was the same reading I was at, but she read a poem which really grabbed me. And I just went nuts when she read this poem. So without thinking, you know, after she read it, I said, Mary, can I have that poem? And she just gives it to me. I was sitting down at her feet with all the groupies, and she just handed me the poem, and I thought, well, that was really nice little touch. I felt like kind of imposing on her in one respect, but I thought it was very sweet of her to give me a poem.
It wasn't her only copy.
Probably she must have had to have another copy. Let's hope so, because I thought later, God, I wonder if she's got a copy of her own. Well, I like to ask most of my guests if there was ever a time when they remembered that they were not poets.
Oh,
was
sure.
there a time in your life, it never would have occurred to you to become one?
Oh, no. Where I come from, people generally don't go to college, and they don't think of becoming poets, certainly. I didn't really write poetry until after college.
Oh, after college.
That's right. I wrote a few things that might have been called poems by someone who didn't know any better when I was in college, but I didn't really try to write poetry until after college.
Did something kind of nudge you into it? I mean, did you have a favorite poet that you'd studied, or did you know a poet?
No, it was dumb luck. I believe in dumb luck. And in my case, everything is dumb luck.
The best way to go.
I was interested in the other arts. You see, I was a cornet player, trumpet player. I preferred cornet, and from when I was shorter than I am now, even.
Mm-hmm.
And I played for years and years and years. You named it, I played it. Every kind of music you can think of, with every kind of group you can think of,
Wow.
in every kind of situation you can think of. And I loved it, but I knew I wouldn't continue. And later, I practiced what we used to call creative photography to distinguish it from photojournalism.
Mm.
Did that quite seriously for quite a while. Eventually did some pottery, throwing pots. And so I was interested in arts, and I was interested in the kind of odd ducks that practice art.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't find out about poetry till later than many people.
Probably a good thing, too, because you probably had a more of a grasp of it.
Oh,
And,
no, I don't
you
think I
suppose?
knew anything. I don't know much more now.
Well, I have to confess, I don't either, Marvin. I was once forced to have to write a review, and I was just sunk. I didn't know what the hell. How do you
reviews?
talk about poetry?
Oh,
you know?
poetry is easy. Reviews are hard.
Yeah, reviews are tough. But there's not an easy way to talk about poetry, is there?
Well,
Do you ever get...
It's
Okay.
hard to talk about for good poetry. It's hard to talk about for this
Mhm.
reason. Poetry tries to use words to get beyond words.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, what it had said, theoretically at least, ideally, could not have been said in any other words.
Mm-hmm.
So now, how do you talk in a review? Or down on the floor. This is performance poetry now, and we're going to. So you should stop for a while and save film, right? You like to keep rolling, do you? I don't know.
Whatever will happen, will
That
happen.
gaffer tape, I don't know where that is.
Let's do this. Let's wind it around first.
Okay.
Take the pressure off it. Okay.
Yeah, take the torque
Yeah.
off.
Take the pressure off, and then get it up here.
This is living evidence of the Murphy's Law.
Lock it in good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You think that's good enough? You want another one? Okay. Okay. So we're back, and I'll just you'll edit all this later, right?
Yeah.
You'll get all the good
Can you
parts
make me
out.
yeah? Can you make me taller when you edit it?
Yeah.
Oh,
We
good.
have the stretch feature.
See, he's almost as tall as me now.
Yeah, I got a good
Right.
chair.
That's why he wanted a different chair.
It's hard to talk about poetry because poetry uses words to get beyond words.
Mhm.
And so when you start taking it apart, you lose the effect of the whole. And the whole is
Mhm.
greater than the sum of the parts. This is true in poetry, true with a vengeance in poetry. So you talk about metaphor or figures of speech, you talk about lines, you talk about stanzas, you talk about meter and rhyme, you talk
Mhm.
about syntax, whatever, vocabulary, imagery, narrative. But those are just pieces of the whole.
Buzzwords.
Sometimes that too.
Yeah. It's almost like making poetry into high tech to break down the parts, use all this jargon, and it kind of makes it seem like, well, gee, this is a construction of something more than what it really is.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, it is possible to talk usefully about good poetry,
Mhm.
but it has to be done with a little bit of jujitsu.
Yeah, and a good critic, I admire critics because they are an art. They do an art of their own, don't they? They can see things that we probably don't realize when we're writing them.
Well, that was true when we had good critics.
You know, good critics. Where did the critics go?
No, actually,
Do you suppose it's left up to us to be critics of
there
ourselves?
are critics out there, and
Uh-huh.
some are well known, and some of the others are actually pretty good.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure. Well, how to say this? I don't know quite how to say this politely, but I would say the critical situation for American poetry right now, that is a situation of criticism in terms of American poetry right now, is not helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems to be, the idea is that if it's destructive, or you can't be honest without being destructive.
Well, it's what I'm really thinking of, John, is a lot of jargon-based, theory-based poetry, criticism, which is interested in jargon-based, theory-based poetry. But
Mhm.
there's no point in complaining about it because everyone's entitled to write exactly the way they
Sure.
wish to. And if those people receive critical attention, maybe that is good for them.
And sometimes it's amusing.
There's
to
all
read.
kinds of poetries out there, you know. The
Yeah.
tree of poetry has lots of branches on it, and some people choose to perform their little poetry dance way out on the thinnest twig of the smallest limb, you know. That's
The
their
cutting
choice.
edge.
That's their choice.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know.
What the heck?
There's no one way to write. There's no right way to write.
Yeah. You know, when I was over at Breathing Between the Lines, there was a brief moment there when they flashed in white letters on a black screen, "If I Lost You." Now, I think I read that poem. That was the title, wasn't it?
No, it's actually a part of a line from a poem of mine called To Dorothy, a poem to my wife.
Yeah, I'd
And they
seen
were
it.
finishing every performance with it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know, any of this. When I came to the show, all I knew
Oh.
was that it was some sort of show in which they were going to dance to some of my poems.
So it was a nice surprise for
I
you.
had no idea that they were going to do all this other stuff.
Uh-huh.
Now, I had seen two dances that this group had done to poems of mine previously, and so I knew they were really good.
Mhm.
They're a group called Travelers, and their choreographer is one of the dancers, Angela Hayes,
Right.
who teaches gifted students here out of Shimmick School.
The tall woman.
The tall, dark-haired woman.
Yeah.
And a couple of them have studied with, one or two have studied with, in the past studied with, now I'm just blocked on the name.
The other name of the other group.
No. In New York City, they studied with, and I've just, okay, the audience is here. Name great dancers,
Yeah.
great dance teachers and
Oh,
dancers.
Balanchine.
No.
Joffrey, the Joffrey?
Huh?
Someone-
No, a person.
A person.
Russian.
I didn't. No.
Not a Russian.
American.
Russian?
Probably American.
Nuria?
No.
Two
American?
Russian.
Great dancer and choreographer and dance teacher.
Nijinsky.
No. Later. Now. I mean, recently.
It'll probably come
They
back
studied-
to us.
I just blocked on this. I was talking about it with someone this morning.
That happens to
Well,
me.
it's okay. Anyway, you
Goes
might
with
want to
the
cut that too. One or two of the dancers have studied with a very famous dancer and dance teacher. And when I told Dorothy that, Dorothy happens to be a trained dancer, and she said, "Oh, that explains it," because she had seen moves in the dances that are attributable to that particular dancer and his style.
Oh.
They're very good. They call themselves the Travelers. They danced together for a very long time.
They interpreted you fairly well then, didn't they? They had an
I
interpretation.
thought they did a great job. And the music was terrific. The whole show was terrific. It was a hoot.
Yeah, in fact, I just cracked up because I know Mark.
Yeah.
He works here as one of our technicians.
He's a man of many
Oh,
talents.
man, he was funny, wasn't he?
He was
God.
funny. He's a terrific dancer. He even knows tap.
Yeah. The part that I really loved was, you remember there's this kind of innocent little girl there, and he was giving her instructions.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd say, well, now, you do this, and you are to be the receptacle of this man's love, blah, blah, blah. And she says, oh, so I'm sort of just a vessel for for men's lust. And Mark says, well, you make that sound like it's a bad thing.
He was very funny. The show was different each night. The
Yeah,
dancers
didn't
were the
change.
same each night,
Oh,
but they were improvising within the framework of the skit.
I wondered if they improvised.
Oh yeah, it was
It
quite
looked
different.
like improv.
And the video changed from night to night as he got the show
Oh.
to be what he wanted it to be. The slides
Oh.
changed from night to night.
Yeah, when I mentioned this title that I saw, If I Lost You, I got to thinking, that says it exactly, even though the English language kind of is lacking in conjugatory versatility. Does that make sense?
Can he say conjugatory on the air?
Conjugatory, yeah, is that a bad word?
Can we say that conjugatory?
Or conjugation of
It
verbs.
sounds really erotic, I think.
Yeah, conjugation
It
only
is a
of,
kind of conjugatory poem.
merely of verbs. Only verbs will conjugate. So, at any rate, I thought, Jesus, now in Russian or French or something, they'd probably have a big long rap, to describe the feeling. But I was really hit broadside by the meaning of just those short words, if I lost you. It was conditional and it was expectatory. Is that a word?
It's just as good as conjugatory.
But at any rate, well, even better, maybe. But I thought that says so much in just those short words that anybody who knows English would immediately get the impact. We hope, most people. But did that get by you, or was it that big of a deal for you? Or
No, they were flashing, that particular night, they were flashing lines from that poem, which they would use at the end of the show, the poem called To Dorothy, on the screen. And If I Lost You, is part of one line late in the poem. But what it says is, the second half of that poem begins with this. It says, a child said it and it seemed true, things that are lost are all equal, but it isn't true. if I lost you, and then it goes on from there.
I guess the next burning question I have, and I read the Book of the Dead Man last week, and I've read about people who have read the book, and I've looked up critics on the internet and everything, and they have all these ways of describing who and what and where is the dead man. And so I thought to myself, there's just so much there. Maybe I should try to find out for myself. So I asked myself this. I said, who is the dead man not? And maybe you could help me with this. Is he a live person even? Is the dead man really dead?
He's dead and alive at the same time.
Oh, and yet aware of what's going on.
Yeah, there's an old Zen admonition, which I use as an epigraph to that book, which says, live as if you were already dead.
I just read that this morning. That's a great way to go through life, I think. If it's your last day.
It means you take part, you participate fully, but you have a long view, too. And so the dead man is alive and dead at the same time. Is he me? No. He knows a lot about me.
So, you know what? I got an email from my grandson. Can I read
Sure.
part of it? He read the Book of the Dead Man. This is so serendipitous. How old is this grandson? He's about 27. He just got out of prison. And he's a semi-truck driver. And he lives down in southern Georgia. And he read your book. And this is really, and one of my sisters sent me an email. She had you actually sign a book. And she lives out in Port Angeles, Washington.
Okay.
And I guess she went to one of your readings and had you sign the book. So,
Well, Dorothy and I go out to the Northwest every summer. We're not going to do it this summer, but we've been doing it now 16 or 17 years. I always like to say, I like to point out to people that I taught summer school for 20 years in a row. You see, I want that credit before I say that we now go out to Port Townsend, Washington in the summers. And Port Angeles is about 50 miles away.
Yeah, she goes in there quite a bit. I think she takes courses there, courses for old folks at the university there.
Well, even in Port Townsend, an organization called Centrum uses Fort Worden, one of the coastal forts there, to offer elder hostel classes and to hold festivals of all kinds, including a writers' conference.
Yeah, and it struck me as so serendipitous to have two of my relatives who live across the continent who had somehow read about the dead man independently of me. And it blows me away. Here's what my grandson said. I'll just pick one sentence here. He said, I looked up Marvin Bell and read the poem above. His work pierces my imagination. And I think he was referring to the dead have nothing to lose by telling the truth.
Oh, I know what he found. He actually found something other. Wait a minute now. I'm going to take this back.
Was it in the
Where does
poem
that
of the
come
dead
from?
man?
Oh, I know what he found. He didn't. It wasn't actually a dead man poem. He found a poem that I wrote. I was commissioned to write for the celebration of the Human Rights Declaration, the Human Rights Declaration. It was a big anniversary for it about 2 years ago, I guess, and that poem appears on a couple of websites, I think, and I think that's it.
Yeah, maybe he pulled it off that site and not the...
I think that's it.
Here's what my sister sent me in an email. I don't know if you know her. Her name is Marjorie Holstitch. And she goes to the readings out there and everything. And she says, the Marvin Bell reader is the one I bought, autograph too. I wonder if I missed a reading at Port Book and News or the college. Find out if he still lives in Port Townsend. My book has only excerpts from the dead man. I think the dead man is the Tao, real Zen, or the poet within us all. Talk about jargon here.
I like it.
Does it sound good? So far, so good. Poet and non-poet alike, who speaks through the silences sometimes and sometimes shouts. The whole non-judgmental history of man absorbing everything, forgetting nothing awash in the pain and beauty of it all. And so I thought this kind of wiped me out. See, they didn't realize I too was doing some research. And here they were all reading the same stuff I was. And, well, Marvin, you're practically, for a long time I thought you were a native Iowa Cityan and born and raised in Goosetown. That's not right, is it?
No, I've lived here 130 years, but actually I come from elsewhere.
Well, that would qualify you to be an honorary local.
Yeah, I am. The only person who's lived here longer than I have is Jerry Stevenson.
Yeah, Gerald has even beaten me, I guess, and John there.
Oh, yeah, and John. That's
John.
right. There are many people here. I just wanted to kid Jerry.
Yeah, you've got an in for Jerry.
You can never, you can never kid Jerry too much.
He's a good kid.
I'm not sure what he's doing here. I think the audience should be told that Gerald Stevenson is here, and he's making some odd gesture with his fingers.
He's making shush motions or something.
Iowa City's a very strange town.
Yeah.
Jerry is partly why.
Well, Jerry was one of the reasons that I came here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I heard some Navy officer, this before I got out of the service, he was raving about Iowa City. He went to school here when they had the Navy barracks.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, now there's a guy in Iowa City, he said, who, if I was a typecaster, I would typecast Gerald Stevenson. and he was the editor of the Iowa Defender at the time.
I remember.
And owner of the paper place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get him to be a guest on the Poets' Corner, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to subtly finesse him into it.
All you got to do is spin that camera around,
Spin it around on him. That wouldn't be too hard to do. Should we do it?
Well, you'd have to mic him first.
Yeah. Maybe we could get a good shot of Jerry. Oh, there he is.
Okay, where were we now before I took us off the track?
Oh, let's see. We were talking about Iowa City. I've been here so long that I can't remember not being from here, actually, but I've been here about 40 years or so.
I, too, been here that long. I came in the fall of, I came in January of 1961 to be a graduate student bum in the writer's workshop. And I was here for 3 years. I left. I had to go in the Army. And I went in 1964, New Year's Eve. I was packing, 1964. And came out in the fall of 65 and was asked back here to teach. Came back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came here in 62. Jerry and John, they were here. They were old institutions.
Mm-hmm.
When you and I got here.
Mm-hmm.
I came here the year after the big flood. Were you here then, when the streets all flooded downtown?
I don't remember this, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yeah, it might have happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I heard all the locals talking about it. Louise, you're a local. Did it happen? The big flood? Okay.
Huh. Where'd the water come from?
Iowa River.
It got uphill that far?
Oh, yeah.
It got at least halfway up Benton Hill.
No kidding. Wow. Gee, here I thought we were safe.
I thought I was safe on my own hilltop, but apparently that was just a small island big enough for one person to walk around one-footed on. Up in Goosetown there.
Well, we've both been here a long time.
Yeah. Well, we feel proprietary about the place, don't we? I mean, I feel like this is my hometown.
Well, Iowa City is a very unusual city. It's unusual for Iowa, and it's unusual for the country as a whole. It's a secret many people know.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't get out. I hope it doesn't leak out like Belize. You know what happened to Belize?
This won't be Belize,
Oh, thank God.
Our beaches are very short.
Yeah, and resort hotels.
Yeah.
Never.
But we live in the East Coast, and in the West. Dorothy and I go to the East Coast for a while in the winter. We go to the West Coast in the summer, and the people out there, of course, often don't know where Iowa is and don't know much about it. And they say, "Oh, it's flat out there, isn't it?" And I say, "Oh yeah, there's not a hill anywhere." And they say, "Oh, it's really cold in the winter." I say, "Oh yeah, it's 40 below every day." They say it's hot in the summer. I say, "Oh, over 100 all the time."
That will be enough to scare away the hard.
Yeah, they're not coming here anyway. They'll never know. But people in the East, really, we have good friends in the East. Nonetheless, I'll be introduced to someone at a gathering, and they'll say, "Where you're from?" And I'll say, "Oh, I'm from Iowa City." And they'll say, "Oh, I have a friend in Columbus."
Or Pocatello.
Yeah, they really haven't got a clue.
Yeah, I married an Eastern girl, a New Yorker, and I was afraid that my in-laws would think I was a gold digger because she was very, very rich, Long Island family. Only it turned out that they were fascinated by me because they thought that I was some swashbuckling hero from the Wild West.
Where are you from?
Well, originally born in Iowa, but I grew up everywhere else in the world except here. Only came back here after I got out of the service. But at any rate, being a native Iowan kind of gave me some sort of laissez-passer. How about that?
Is that another conjugatory kind of thing?
Well, I was struggling with I was trying to struggle with a sophisticated French phrase here. Laissez-passer. How's that, Louise? Laissez-passer.
What does
At
that
any
mean?
rate, I think it means it's okay for him to come
So you
in.
have a
Yeah,
entree.
yeah, entree.
Mm-hmm.
And, so at any rate, they were charmed by me, and they just opened the doors, and they just thought that Barbara was just so lucky to have me. Well, I'm talking about myself here. Let's.
You were getting conjugatory there.
Yeah, every time I.
You were
every
right on
time
the
I-
edge.
When I
Conjugatoriness.
think, when I think about wives, I think about conjugation. Huh? Let's see. Where were we? Iowa City.
We were in Iowa City.
Okay. Let's see. What were some of the? Were there any local landmarks that kind of that you hone in on as? How can I put this? Are there landmarks that you feel specifically attached to?
Here in Iowa City.
Yeah, like a building or a place. Or
Well, a great many of them have gone away, of course. You know,
a lot of them.
Jerry Stevens' bookstore, The Paper Place, which one year actually sponsored a softball team that the writers put together.
Oh.
And, we played in the fast pitch local league here. We hit pretty well, but we didn't really have a good enough pitcher, so we never won a game.
Oh, did Jerry get to play or?
No, he didn't get to play, but he provided shirts that said The Paper Place. And
Oh.
all the other people had, shirts from beer distributors and so forth. And I noticed they'd slide a little hard into third base when I was out there, but I'm not sure that was the fault of the shirt. But Jerry had The Paper Place, and upstairs he had the Cara Press,
Yeah.
which was a wonderful, fine press. And the great bars were Kenny's and Donnelly's. Kenny's
yeah.
was a bar where the art crowd went, and Donnelly's was kind of half art and half towny.
Yeah.
It was a great bar. And
Remember
Yeah.
Waltz down in South Dubuque?
yeah, I think so.
That was kind of a totally prolly bar, I guess.
Yeah.
But some of the few brave literary types would go there because it was quite a colorful place. Max Yoakum owned it. Remember Max?
Oh, I remember Max Yoakum. I remember when he finally decided to go to Argentina, and he wouldn't leave without getting his brass pole back from the firehouse.
Yeah.
So as far as we know, there are firemen on the second floor of the firehouse who have never been able to get down because Max took his pole to Argentina. Yeah, I remember that. He used to move houses. I don't know if he ever bothered to get a permit, but he'd
Never
just
got
move
permit.
houses down the street, and he'd, take the wires down and stuff like that. And I think eventually he decided that authorities were hassling him too much, and he went off to Argentina to be a rancher.
Were you here the day when he held off the county sheriff with a shotgun?
I'm not surprised. I don't remember. but
Yeah, he was
I'm
on
surprised.
top of this house and he took the lines down. He wasn't supposed to. And the sheriff stood on the ground. He said, "All right, Max, come down." And Max just jacked around in his shotgun. And the cops backed off and let him go.
Those were the days.
Yeah.
But as far as landmarks go, one tends to feel most emotion for things that were there when you were young, when you first came to town, when you were becoming whatever it is you would become. I don't. Is anyone going to feel as nostalgic for the mall in Coralville as they do for the Paper Place or Kenny's? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's something that's just gone. It's, I don't know, there's a few of the old structures, but there seemed to be a kind of a, now get ready for this, folks. There used to be, should I? Oh, okay, what the hell? There used to be a zeitgeist here, and I think that's past, don't you?
That's a good question.
It used to seem to be here, but it's...
Yeah, I don't know. We have to be careful because as we get older, we can turn into crabs. We can turn into people. Most older people think things used to be better,
Yeah.
and they didn't used to be better. They used to be
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Every young person thinks the world around him or her is the natural one.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, the years go past. So I want to be careful about judging, today in relation to yesterday. Some of what we revere is gone, but
Yeah.
that couldn't be helped.
Maybe those of today have their own landmarks
Oh, sure.
and their own zeitgeist.
Absolutely. I also want to mention the original Hamburg Inn on Iowa Avenue, which
Oh,
was
yeah,
open
right.
24 hours a day.
The old one.
And if we had any power here, I would say to that camera, bring it back, or at least open the other one 24 hours a day.
There you go.
That was a great greasy spoon.
I hear that.
Absolutely.
And
One
the-
night, I'll tell you a story. One night we came out of Donnelly's with some people. Donald Justice, the poet, and I, and Annie Searle, who was the administrative assistant at the Writers' Workshop then, and Larry Barrett,
Yeah,
who
Larry.
was the voice of WSUI.
John is his old buddy.
And Larry, of course, had that radio voice. When we staged a reading one time with some others of W.H. Auden's oratorio for the time being, and there was a point in which Larry, being a kind of radio announcer, says, "You have been listening to the voice of Caesar." And when he said it, of course, the place was up for grabs because he had that great radio voice, that mellifluous, deep voice. Well, we came out of Kenny's. It was a fall night, I believe. There were hardly anybody on the street, and we were walking along, and I think Don's car was parked down opposite. What's that bar on Clinton Street? It's been here for thousands of years. It's only half the size it used to be.
Oh,
Airliner.
The Airliner, thank you.
Airliner, yeah.
The Airliner. And the football team, or at least some of them, led by the quarterback Gary Snook, as I recall. Is that his name? Yeah, Gary Snook.
Very strong.
Oh, they came out. They were having a good time. They came out at closing time, and they were having a little beer can fight. They were throwing beer cans at each other. And one of the beer cans came over close to Don's car on the street, and Don yelled something at one of them. And one of them yelled back, you can imagine what. And Don yelled it back at him, at which point, of course, the whole backfield of the football team was heading across the street to beat us up. And Annie Searle, being a smart young woman, took off, and there was Larry Barrett, Donald Justice, and me facing about 12 football players. And we were jostling around. I was looking for the shortest guy. I figured, I want to fight with the littlest guy, but even the littlest guy was big. And Larry Barrett, the littlest guy, in fact, pushes through the crowd, goes up to Larry Barrett's wearing a winter coat, gets his hands in his pockets, standing in front of a car. He rushes up to Larry and he says, I'm the littlest guy here. You want to get hit by me? And Larry says, well, if you're the littlest guy here, of course I want to be hit by you. So the guy slugs him. Larry slides down the car. He falls back against the car. He slides down the car. His hands in his pockets, never takes them out, comes to his feet and starts talking in that mellifluous voice. And the next thing you know, we're all in the Hamburg Inn singing the Iowa Fight Song.
All together. Football players, too.
Larry Barrett had a convincing voice.
Yeah, he had this mellifluous baritone that was just, very authoritative.
Mm-hmm.
You knew he was a media person.
He was a great radio voice.
Well, you've been around here long enough to where you probably might have a Don Nielsen story or two. Remember Don Nielsen?
No.
Oh, he was...
Did I know him?
Might have.
Am I related to him?
Not related.
Does he live at home with me?
But I don't think so.
I honestly, I'm not sure. I don't know.
He was kind of the local bad man around here for several years, and he finally died. But
I'm sorry, I don't think I know him.
yeah, he was the bane of downtown Iowa City for a long time, all the bars.
Maybe I know him by looks.
But everybody had a Don Nielsen story. But at any rate, Gerald probably knew him, didn't you, Gerald? And John.
Recollection.
They knew him.
Not
Alright.
favorable.
Yeah.
R.I.P.
We've had a lot of people in Iowa City, very unusual people. This is a town of unusual people. It's a town, of course, filled with artists and writers and dancers and musicians and composers and so forth. There are reasons for that. In some cases, the reason is a special kind of department at the university, but in other cases, it's grown up outside the university. And people know about Iowa City. Many years ago, you could walk into a bookstore in the Village in New York City, say, and you could buy what were called freak maps of the United States. And freak maps had on them cities, but very few, spread out across the United States. That were the freak cities, right?
Stylized.
And there would be Berkeley and the Village and Taos and Iowa City. Even then, Iowa City would be there. Yeah.
It's a place that people come back to.
Well, many years ago, I think I must have been a graduate student when this happened. Maybe someone can tell me when. A fellow walked in the First National Bank, when it was the First National Bank here at Clinton and Washington, no, Dubuque and Washington, and held it up in broad daylight, got away. He was wearing a dress, stockings, heels, and a red wig. Does anybody remember this?
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, I remember the Cedar Rapids anchor man that night. He reported this. And then he couldn't resist. He said, only in Iowa City could a man wearing a dress, stockings, heels, and a red wig hold up a bank in broad daylight and get away by mingling with the crowd.
You know how they finally caught him, Marv?
I didn't know they had caught him.
They did catch him.
Huh?
He went right straight down to Gabe's and started boasting of his exploits. And about half the people down there, were narcotics agents looking for the other half who were not. And this guy's sitting right amongst a bunch of narcs boasting about how he'd pulled off this job with only a red wig and a dress.
I never knew that he got caught.
Yeah, they finally nabbed him. And, I guess they didn't want to make it public too much because it was such an embarrassing caper,
Well, that's Iowa City.
Yeah.
This program is going to, destroy everything.
Yeah, we're going to.
What would you like to know?
Oh, let's see. This is getting kind of literary, I guess, but I noticed a curious construction in the Dead Man poems. Getting back to those. I'm kind of intrigued by them. Let me just pick one out of, hundreds of examples. But the beginnings of them, I'll choose this poem here. First postscript about the dead man. The first two lines. First line says, "The dead man thinks he is alive when he hears his bones rattle. Hearing his bones rattle, the dead man thinks he is alive." And I noticed quite a few of those have those inverted construction. Is that from a tradition of some kind? It kind of reminds me of Omar Khayyam
Oh,
in a way.
it's just me. It
Just-
happens a lot in the earliest poems in the
Uh-huh.
Book of the Dead Man. I did another book's worth of Dead Man poems called Ardor.
Uh-huh.
If you look closely on the cover, it says the Book of the Dead Man, Volume 2.
Mhm.
And later on, I wrote poems that are collected in Nightworks here, the newer poems that are called Sounds of the Resurrected Dead Man's Footsteps.
Right.
And I pretty much stopped doing that. But you want to know the real truth? Should we
Right.
put the real truth on the film here?
Lay it on me.
Okay. The first Dead Man poem I wrote while in Port Townsend, Washington, not in the summer, but one winter when I was living there.
Mhm.
And I wrote a poem that sounded as if it came from somewhere else. It sounded as if it belonged to some so-called wisdom book lost to antiquity, like the Tibetan Book of the Dead or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And so I called it From the Book of the Dead Man, even though I had no intention of ever writing another poem like it or writing a book called The Book of the Dead Man. I had no intention. And I stuck it in a book that came out in 1990, a book called Iris of Creation. Well, Dorothy, in fact, looked at that poem and she said, "Oh, you should write some more of these," but I never take good advice 2 years later. And it took about 4 years. And the only reason I wrote the poem that you just quoted from, which was the second one and got me hooked, is because of a series of events involving a children's book writer named Jane Yolen. Jane Yolen's a very prolific children's book writer. Her name is on 100 children's books as the author or the editor. And she used to teach a children's writing class in Port Townsend, Washington at the Writers' Conference that ran for 10 days every July. And one year when she was teaching out there, she said to me, "I'm doing a book of adult fantasy. And why don't you send something? You know what would have been good, that Dead Man poem I saw of yours, but we can't use work that's already published. It has to be new work." I said, "Okay." But I never got around to it. I never sent her anything. And the next year I saw her again, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't send anything." And she said, "Well, I'm going to do another volume. And that Dead Man poem would have been great, but we can't use published work." I said, "Okay." So I looked for stuff that was unpublished that might fit whatever adult fantasy means, It was not supposed to be conjugatory, by the way.
Oh,
Okay.
pity.
And and so and then I sent her all this stuff, and she sent it all back. She said, "Oh, well, this is all wonderful, but none of it fits, what I think of for this book. But that Dead Man poem,
This very one.
that would have fit." And so I thought to myself, okay, you want another Dead Man poem? I'll write another Dead Man poem. And I wrote it imitating the first one. And the first one, you see, began with a line, "The dead man thinks he is alive when he sees blood in his stool." And then he simply reverses the parts. Instead of seeing blood in his stool, the dead man
Right.
thinks he's alive. So I tried the same technique. The dead man, and what does it say? The dead man thinks he is alive when his bones rattle or
Yeah,
something?
when his
What
bones
does that say?
rattle.
Yeah, the dead man thinks he's alive when he hears his bones rattle.
Uh-huh.
Hearing his bones rattle, the dead man thinks he's alive. And notice
So
something
the,
else.
The first one was the blood in the stool.
That's right. And the third line of the very first one I wrote is, he thinks himself alive because he has no future. Third line of this one is, he thinks himself alive because what else would he think? Fourth line of the first one, isn't that the way it always was, the way of life? Fourth line of this one, now he can love and suffer as in life and live alone. So I'm beginning to diverge. But that's how I got myself started.
So they intermeshed and then kind of became other entities.
Well, I was beginning to
then-
discover, without realizing it, a kind of structure and a kind of form that eventually would completely hook me. So the third one, The third one begins, when the dead man throws up, he thinks he sees his inner life. Seeing his vomit, he thinks he sees his inner life. Okay, the fourth one, the dead man has a fixation on shoes. Seeing his shoes, he cannot take his eyes off them. So it's just beginning to move away. The fifth one, when the dead man's ankle breaks, he is stoical. Being stoical, the dead man is not hobbled by a broken ankle. So it's beginning to move further away from just repeating, you know. And then, yeah, it's pretty much, I gave up that means pretty much. Once in a while I would do it later on.
Well, this leads to another question that I like to ask people, Marv. Have you ever, and maybe you must have you ever kind of conjured up a poem ready-made that needed no further editing? Does that ever happen?
Oh, yeah, I think that happens to everybody who writes. You labor at some poems and they never get up and boogie, you know.
Yeah.
They don't come to life.
And others just are tailor-made. Right?
And others come out and they need very little touch-up, if any at all, and touch-up they need is just correcting something where you just kind of made a mistake.
Do you have one of those with you, or?
Well, I don't know which that applies to. I wouldn't know anymore. I don't know.
Or maybe I'll ask you this. Do you have with you your very first poem that you've ever written?
Oh, no, I don't.
Do you remember it, or do you know what it was about?
Well, I know about it. Let's see, there's no very first poem exactly. I wrote some things that looked like Lawrence Ferlinghetti poems.
Oh,
when
great.
The Beat Generation was new. When I was in college, in order to keep a friend of mine awake all night, he was going to flunk out of college, and I didn't want him to, and a teacher had said, if you give me a 10-page paper when I get to the office tomorrow morning, I'll give you a C and you won't flunk out. But he wasn't going to bother doing it, and I didn't want him to leave. So I said, I'll tell you what, Roy, you stay up and write your paper, I'll stay up and keep you company. So I had to do something, so I sat across the room and I would type up these crazy old Ferlinghetti-like poems and go over them, wave them in front of his face to keep him up. But then one day I saw something on a bulletin board. And you know, in those days, bulletin boards didn't have many things on them. So when you saw something on a bulletin board, you went over and read it because it looked like it was important. This was at a little school in upstate New York called Alfred University. And it was an announcement from a magazine called Presidio. I wasn't hip enough to know that Presidio probably meant the magazine was in San Francisco, but it was. They wanted poetry for this, I guess it was a new magazine. And they were going to pay so much per line. Not very much, but, you know, they're going to pay something. And I thought, wow, people pay for poetry. So I went down to the newspaper office. I was the editor of the newspaper, and I had a key, and I wrote a poem. And I didn't want them to know it was my first poem, so I called it Ontology Part 2.
Clever.
and I wrote it in 5 beats to a line as best I could do it, and with rhymes, and it was very obscure and very, you know, very wise and obscure and really terrible.
But they didn't realize that, did they? I mean,
Well, actually, they bought it.
yeah, but they must have thought it was so esoteric that they didn't want to admit they didn't understand it.
I don't think they cared when it came out. It had all kinds of typos in it, you know, and it didn't make much difference either.
Which they might have thought was deliberate. Like E. Cummings not capitalizing anything.
Oh, they did the mistakes.
Oh, good.
I gave them a fair copy, but they didn't care. Anyway, that probably passes for my first poem.
Oh. Have you ever had, how long was it? How many days and years of rejection slips did you have to wade through before you hit? Or did you go through a long rejection?
Well, I got plenty of rejections, but I always got acceptances too because I sent poems to very small magazines. Very small magazines. In those days, there was no National Endowment for the Arts. There was no Coordinating Council of Little Magazines. There was no COSMEP. What does that stand for? But that has to do with magazines too. There were no state arts councils giving out money to magazines. So magazines came and went according to the energy and the finances of their editor.
They were bold.
I had one myself, a magazine called Statements of Visual and Literary Materials.
Oh, your own magazine.
Yeah, it was a quarterly, and in 5 years it published 6 issues. Quarterlies in those days never made it. You know, they never got out.
6 issues, that's pretty good shelf life, isn't it? For
over 5 years.
Yeah.
That was it.
So.
But there were many, many, many little magazines. There was a magazine called Trace, edited by James Boyer May for Villiers out of England. He operated out of their United States office, and they ran they had a little thick magazine that was all about little magazines. And would tell you which ones were new, which ones had expired, and the addresses had changed, and all of that. There were so many. There are many magazines now, of course, but there were so many little magazines that if your standards were low enough, which mine were, you could get acceptances as well as rejections.
Mhm. Yeah. It seems like in my own life, I'd get rejection after rejection, and then finally, when I got my first acceptance, I got nothing but acceptances.
Oh,
It just kind of came in
that's
bunches.
lucky.
Yeah, I was on a roll.
You know,
It made me feel spooky.
I don't know if you ever heard the poet William Stafford read.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, he had a little trick he would do sometimes. Now, Stafford was a great poet and a wonderful man, and he was also extremely prolific, and he published thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of poems in his lifetime. And he would be reading along. He was a very popular reader, and he'd be reading along. I saw him do this many times. And he would read a poem that clearly the audience liked. He'd get one of those little gasps, in the audience or something, or a little moan or something. And he would say, well, now, this poem appeared in Atlantic Coast Quarterly. And you'd think, if you'd never heard him do this before, you'd think, oh, my goodness, is he going to brag about his publication? And he'd say, but before the heroes at Atlantic Coast Quarterly took this poem, there were some other editors who weren't so heroic and, rejected it, and he would turn the poem over, because he never read from a book. He always read from a sheaf of poems that he had pasted up or typed up. He would turn the page over, and he would start to read the names of the magazines where that poem had been rejected. And the list would go on and on and on and on and on and on, all the way down the bottom of the page. And some of these magazines would be magazines like The Atlantic or The Nation or The New Yorker, where it's very difficult to get a poem accepted. And others would be magazines like John's Grocery,
Yeah.
And you'd wonder, my goodness, they had the nerve to reject this, famous poet William Stafford. It was a little lesson for the whole audience that, number one, it's not personal, and number two, everybody's getting rejected.
Yeah. Very good. How much time have we got here? I would 3:30. Well, I was just wondering, should we run into another? This is not really. Well, this will be edited out.
We can do whatever you want.
But we could run on into other tapes if you all run out.
Yeah.
If we run out of
Sure.
time, or.
Well, we should probably not go more than another half hour because I have a student meeting me at 4.
Oh, hell, how much time have we got?
47 minutes.
47.
We can run a little over or something.
47 and a half minutes we've used.
Oh,
We've used already?
Yeah.
Oh, so we've got up until 63 minutes.
I guess.
so you only got about 13 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
Well,
yeah.
Talk fast.
Okay. Fast.
Okay.
Rapid fire staccato. At any rate,
Yeah.
I wonder if you do me a huge favor, Marvin. If I could ask you to autograph a couple of books of yours that I bought.
Oh, yeah, I can do that.
Could you do that for me? I've got a collection of books in my library written by people that I know. And I've got a couple of shelves full now. And I'm trying to see how many books I can get autographed by people I know within my lifetime. Maybe fill up one more shelf in my library.
Problem with that, though, is that how will you know when you're done?
Well, you never are, I guess.
So you won't, if you're trying to do as many as you can in your lifetime, you won't be done until you're no longer alive.
Yeah, and so.
And then you won't know.
Then I'd be the dead man.
So this is a real problem.
Yeah,
We're
the
going to
dead-
have to arrange some communication or
The dead-
conjugatoriness after
Yeah.
your death.
The dead man doesn't know how many poetry books he has collected. The dead man has not collected the poetry books
There you go.
that he should have.
You are J-O-H-N, right?
J-O-H-N,
You haven't
right?
changed
Not
it,
John.
okay.
John is kind of hip, but I'm not hip.
You're not it, okay.
So-
Actually, the truth is, usually when I sign these, I use a rubber stamp, too. I should explain what that is. A wonderful writer named Judith Kitchen.
Uh-huh.
She's a poet, but she won't admit that most of the time. She's known for her nonfiction. Now she's writing novels, too. She was with us when I was headed off to a bookstore in Seattle one time to do a reading, and I just published this book, The Book of the Dead Man. And she ran into a toy store and came out with a green ink pad and a stamp of a little dancing, waving skeleton.
Oh.
And she said, well, you have to use this on that book now when you sign it. So I was carrying that around, I was using it, and then my friend Frank DeGangi, a potter, started sending me mail with a huge skeleton on it to show me how puny mine was. And when I admired it, he gave it to me. So now I carry both skeletons around. I stamp them on books.
My skeleton is bigger than your skeleton.
Yeah, well, Frank's 6'5", too, you know.
Excuse my reach, Marvin. I want to grab me some
That's all right.
water here. I'm kind of dehydrated here, I guess.
So, what would you like to know before we run out of tape?
Oh, I did have a question
Mm-hmm.
that I was wondering about. And let's see if I'll have to use a little memory crutch here. Oh, yes. Wow, my notes are all mixed up, and I'm out of order. I think I lost half of them. But I just wonder, how do your poems? Let me try to rephrase this in intelligible English. How much do dreams play in the generation of your poems?
Nothing at all, because I don't remember my dreams.
Oh.
I rarely remember a dream, and then very briefly, I haven't made any attempt to, make myself remember them.
Mm-hmm.
And I simply don't remember most of my dreams. Some of my dreams are funny.
Uh-huh.
I
You mean bizarre or
No,
humorous, or-
they're just funny to me. They're funny things
Mhm.
happening, or something. Sometimes I wake Dorothy up, and I'm
Ah.
sort of half awake, and I wake her up, and I say, listen to this, the door is open, the door is open, She says, go back to sleep, Marvin, because it's funny that, dreams have their own authority. So
Indeed they do.
that's it.
You know what I was hoping?
Yeah.
I was hoping you would say, yeah, I wrote a poem in a dream and I kept it intact
Well,
after waking. And
you
then,
know what?
I wrote it in my dream.
One night, you know how you think of things in the middle of the night when you're awake,
Right.
perhaps,
Uh-huh.
and you don't write them down, and you're so sorry because they were so great, and you forgot them in the
Mhm.
morning. Well, I did write it down once.
And
I
couldn't
I
understand
had,
it after.
No, I had the best line I'd ever heard. It was a line of poetry that was fabulous. And I stumbled out of bed in the dark. I scribbled it down. In the morning, I was able to make it out. And you know what it said? It said, "The door is open." That's what it said.
So much for cryptic interpretations
That was
of
it.
dreams.
No, I don't, but there are other people who do. And Bill Stafford, that wonderful poet, had a way of talking about writing that had to do with dreams. He said, imagine a workshop in which the students are there, but the teacher hasn't arrived yet. And the students are talking among themselves, and one of them says, I had this great dream last night. And everybody else says, oh, tell us. And he starts to tell his dream, but then one of the students interrupts him and says, wait a minute. The dream shouldn't go that way at that point. And he says, poems are like dreams.
Well, I didn't know there was a protocol for dreams, but I guess there is.
Well, what Bill meant is that, there are some things about poetry that are not subject to criticism.
Mm-hmm. They're beyond criticism because they are what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Marv, I guess one more question I'd like to ask you. Thank you very much, by the way.
You're very welcome.
I'm very, very honored. Do you, oh God, I wonder if it's, what is this? My mind has slipped a card 3 times now today.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Alzheimer's. I've been checked out. Maybe being in front, I'm never used to being in front of a camera. I just never make it.
While you're doing that, I wanted to scribble some more here.
Oh, great.
Go ahead.
Uh,
Why do you call
Oh.
this? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had a certain favorite time of the day or night that you like to write, or do you write regularly on schedule, or do you just kind of sort of ad hoc it whenever
Yeah.
it feels right to just do it? Or
Yeah, I like to write late at night. I don't have a schedule. I never have had. My metabolism isn't suited to it. My life hasn't been suited to it. I believe in it. I think other people should have one.
Uh-huh.
But I don't. But I like to write late at night. I've always liked to stay up late.
Mhm.
And if I'm going to write, if the pot's going to boil over, it will happen at, after midnight. I used to stay up, I used to start writing at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, and, write till 5 in the morning until I couldn't see anything anymore.
Mhm.
I began to think that I wrote mostly to erase my brain.
Does it work, I wonder? Does sleep erase the brain?
Writing erases your brain.
Writing does.
Late
Oh.
at night.
So,
Well, it
well,
depends.
it probably needs erasing sometimes, don't it?
Well, the thing about art is that it's all about what life feels like, finally.
Mhm.
And people can be wired very differently.
Mhm.
In the university, they forget that. They forget it everywhere. Every institution forgets it.
Yeah.
But people are wired very differently. And a person's genius as a writer and artist has to do with getting in touch and freeing that wiring, listening to their own wiring. Well, a fellow whose name I can't pronounce, maybe someone else can. It's, I'll take a stab at it.
Is it Polish?
Czechom, it's Eastern European. It's,
Oh, Miloš.
No, not a poet.
Oh.
Czechomishhaili, something like that. He wrote a book called Flow, and it's about when you're so fully engaged in an activity such as writing that you have no idea the time's going past. You escape time, and I think
Oh.
that's what artists like about their art, that they are so focused on it. Now, it doesn't have to be art. You can be so focused on growing hybrid roses or running long
Sure.
distances that it happens to you.
Sure.
But that escaping time is a pleasure that's way beyond whether or not you get published or not.
It's its own reward, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And,
And for me, it really, I live a pretty rational life. I mean, I've always had, responsibilities. But late at night, some of those connections begin to let loose a little bit, and that's better for poetry.
Now, I've got one more question, Marv. And now this is not a frivolous question, I don't think. Usually when I ask people about this, they think I'm putting them on. But I'm not. They think I'm just, having them on here. But have you ever heard, now this is, I don't think it's an urban myth, but have you ever heard that there's a correlation between your protein intake and your propensity to rhyme poetry? For instance, if you eat a lot of meat, you tend to write a very tight rhyme scheme, but if you eat vegetables, that you have a more free-flowing. Have you ever heard of that? Has anybody ever told, or have you ever run across it anywhere?
Have you ever heard that?
I have. And in fact, I tested myself.
Well, there are a lot of rhymes with meat, and it's much harder to rhyme with asparagus.
Yeah, so meat is neat,
So,
but
you could-
asparagus is ganeriferous.
yeah, I can see. That sounds like a vegetarian's prejudice about meat eaters must be more conservative, therefore they must take a
Yeah.
rhyme and meter. Vegetarians must be more. They're down the co-op where they're writing free verse.
Yeah,
I think that must be what that's.
or it
based
could be
on.
like the meat-eating authoritarians think of it as a boast, like, ha, I'm a real man, I write rhymes because I eat meat.
Well, there are many people who feel that poetry isn't poetry without rhyme and meter.
Yeah.
There are many people, including some poets, who feel that way. And there are others who feel it's not poetry unless it's extremely concise. And there are others who feel it's not poetry unless it's imagistic. It has many images and graphic illustrations in it. And there are others who feel it's not poetry unless it's full of figures of speech, metaphors and similes and so forth. There are all kinds of definitions of poetry out there, but part of the fun of being any kind of artist is defeating the definitions. So my rap is learn the rules, break the rules, make up new rules, break the new rules.
Sure, that's a general, I think a general dictum of art, all of art, isn't it?
Well, that's what makes it fun.
It's like, one time Bert Pape and Don Nielsen got into a big fight. And you remember Bert Pape?
I do. I saw him come up with 4 of a kind in a poker game once, and everybody else folded, and he just put his cards together and put them down and never said a word. And I thought, oh boy, I am never going to gamble against this guy.
Bert got in a big fight with Nielsen because Nielsen assumed that, see now Bert was an artist, and Nielsen was laying some rap on him like, I'm the student, you're the artist master, but I will surpass you, therefore defeat you. And Bert says, well, but Don, you're not even an artist. And he says, I will surpass you in art even then. And they got into a horrible fight over this.
You know what? I think I just gave Bert Pape credit for 4 of a kind that belongs to someone else. Who's
Schmidt.
the fellow? No, who's the fellow who had the sword cane?
Oh, sword cane?
Yeah, he always walked with a sword cane.
Oh, Morgan.
Not everybody knew it was a sword cane, but it was a sword cane. And he was a great gambler. He was a great poker player. He played in the poker games back when Nelson Algren was losing his shirt and so forth.
Mr. Morgan.
And he always wanted to play, over in Kenny's, he always wanted to play for a penny point in pinball when pinball machines first came to town. And I wouldn't play him, I wouldn't even play him for a pack of cigarettes, even though I was a very good pinball player, because the guy had ice in his veins. He was a terrific gambler. You don't remember him?
Was he a local guy?
Yeah, famous local character, and he walked with a cane, but I knew it was a sword cane.
I was thinking of Mr. Morgan.
But it wasn't Pape. It was
Not
another
Pape.
guy.
Oh.
Well, no matter.
Yeah, it'll come back. I'll think of it about 2 o'clock.
Oh,
in the
well, now
morning.
you see, now while you're trying to think of his name, I thought of the name of the dancer I was talking about way back
Oh, okay.
when. Merce Cunningham.
Oh, sure.
A couple of
Yeah.
the dancers in that group Travelers studied with Merce Cunningham, and indeed my wife Dorothy could see echoes of his dance style.
Great. Yeah, now it's, my mind is coming back into, fluttering back into focus. Well, at any rate, I guess we're just about out of time here, Marvin. You've got to get going to this meeting. So I guess we'll bring the old Poets Corner to a wind-up. And I want to thank you very much
Very welcome.
for coming here. And,
Very welcome, John.
and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Okay.
And maybe when we get hooked up for live broadcast.
Well, you know, the first time I was on a call-in show was many years ago in Rochester, New York. The first person who called in knew my ex-wife.
Oh.
Well, now, she's a very fine person, and we get along just fine, but it was funny.
Well, folks, we are winding up another Poets Corner. And again, I am very happy and very proud to have had Marvin here as a guest. And we'll see you next time. Hopefully we'll have Jerry. Maybe Jerry.
Oh,
will be
Jerry
our guest.
Stevenson's one of the great
Yeah,
figures.
we've got to
in
get
Iowa
Jerry
City.
out here. Okay, folks, I guess that's about 30, and we've got to go to our various appointments. And so, for now, that's 30,
Okay.
as they say.